Hi guys, it's Dylan from Bijou Diamond Jewellery in London with another watch video, and today we're taking a look at a pretty special watch from Patek Philippe, and that is the reference 5180. As with all my reviews, let's go back in time now and take a look at the history of this watch. I'm also going to really look at mainly the history of skeleton watches from Patek Philippe, because the history of this 5180 is not that extensive. It's more actually important and special to look at how rare skeleton watches are from Patek Philippe, and you only need to look in the current collection to realize that this is pretty much the only one they have available. So yeah, let's go back in time now, and specifically to the 1800s to the 1860s, which is when Patek Philippe released their first skeleton watch, and that was a skeleton pocket watch. To that point, they hadn't done any skeletonized watches. And really the purpose of doing that first skeletonized pocket watch was to show off their incredible craftsmanship and watchmaking, and allow that wearer or the owner to really appreciate what Patek Philippe had done beneath the dial. Every time, and including now, every time Patek Philippe does a skeletonized dial, it's always done an extremely low or limited production run, or a very limited number of pieces in the collection that are actual skeleton dials. It is extremely laborious to do skeleton dials, especially in the Patek Philippe way, which I'll come into in a moment. And then we didn't really see any skeletonized watches again for another 100 years or so, until the 1970s, which was when Patek Philippe reintroduced skeleton watches into the collection. That was a pocket watch, and that was the reference 894. But then 10 years later, in the 1980s, actually specifically 1980, we saw them release the reference 3880, which was the first ever Patek Philippe wristwatch with a skeletonized dial. So that was a really important watch, and still is in terms of the history of Patek. That watch was only made in a very, very limited production run, as with all other skeleton watches from Patek. There were actually only 30 examples made of that watch. And then a year later in 1981, we saw the reference 3878. Again, only 60 of those were made, and that was the first ever automatic skeletonized wristwatch from Patek Philippe. So again, another special reference there. Various other models were produced in the 80s and 90s that were skeletonized dials, again, all in incredibly low production numbers. And then in 1998, Patek Philippe decided to discontinue the 3878 and didn't make any more production, or didn't produce any more skeleton dials then until 2007. And that's when we saw the reference 5104, which is the first ever grand complication watch from Patek Philippe with a skeletonized dial. Until this point, there weren't really any complicated dials. That tended to be, or movements, or tended to be only time only, so time, hours and minutes, maybe seconds as well, in terms of skeleton dials they'd offered or movements they'd offered. There was never any serious complications. So this was a pretty impressive feat of watch engineering and watchmaking for Patek Philippe, the 5104. And then 1 year later in 2008, they released the 5180, which is the watch that we're looking at today. And they first released it in white gold, again, the same example we're looking at today. And that was the first really affordable skeletonized watch from Patek Philippe. And again, produced in relatively low production numbers, and one of the only skeleton watches in the collection. So pretty special timepiece. And the first ever examples of this watch actually featured a blue tinted sapphire crystal, which is really strange. I don't know why they did that, but it's quite a unique look, and it's a telltale sign that you've got an early production model. A couple years later, in 2011, we saw the reference 7180, which was a ladies' version of the 5180. And then in 2017, we saw the rose gold variation of the 5180 release. So, but today we're looking at the white gold, and we'll look at the features, but they will trickle over to the other models as well. So that concludes the history of this 5180. Let's take a look now at the features of this watch. We're going to start, as always, with the clasp. The clasp on this watch is super simple, very clean design. It's almost non-existent when you're looking at the bracelet. Very, very minimal. We'd have a really nice hand-engraved Patek Philippe logo or writing in the middle or between the two parts of the clasp. Very elegant, very understated. It kind of, that script makes it feel like it is from the 1800s. It feels very old-fashioned. yeah, there's no adjustability in the clasp, but again, you probably wouldn't need it on a watch like this. You're probably just going to wear it in the evening, some time where your wrist isn't going to expand or contract too much. Yeah, very simple clasp, not too much to say about it, in all polish finish. Moving on to the bracelet now, we've got a very intricate, many linked bracelet in all polish finish. Definitely not my favorite bracelet at all from Patek Philippe. It reminds me of a Breitling bracelet, and I think sadly it slightly ruins the aesthetic of this watch. But some people really love this bracelet, so I won't bash it too much. It is very comfortable though, because you have so many links. It does mean, and all the links are very small as well, it does mean that it conforms to your wrist really beautifully, and makes it extremely comfortable. It almost feels like you're not wearing anything when you wear this watch. The weight obviously is white gold, so it does have a presence on the wrist, but the thinness of the bracelet and the actual watch itself definitely means this watch really hugs itself to your wrist really beautifully. Yeah, not my favorite bracelet, definitely very comfortable though, and some really like it. Moving on to our case now, we have a all polished finish case in 18 karat white gold, same as the bracelet and the clasp. Very simple, elegant case on this watch. The lugs are quite long and elongated. It's very simple, almost as if you were just to draw a round case and then a crown and two sets of lugs coming out. Very simple and clean. It's also extremely thin at 6.7 millimeters in depth. Pretty impressive. I mean, it's a 39 millimeter case diameter watch, so it's sitting on the smaller side of watches, but it doesn't feel it when you put it on. It definitely doesn't feel too small. I think also because it is so transparent, it maybe adds some sort of life through the watch and through the dial interaction. It kind of gives it a different depth. Even though the watch actually is extremely thin, it does feel like it has some sort of depth to it as well, as you're able to look completely through it. Which I think helps make it not feel too small. The case obviously features as well two domed crystals or sapphire crystals either side of the watch, above and below. So you've got the dial side and then the movement side or underneath the watch, and that allows you to see straight through the movement both sides. And they are gently domed. They are really comfortable to wear as well, on the bottom side, your wrist side. Really beautiful and elegant. Again, kind of goes with the gently curved and elegant case too. Now moving on to the dial, which is obviously the star of the show, or the movement. The movement is the caliber 240, which has actually been around for 45 years. Really impressive. It was originally designed though for 31 millimeter case diameter watches. So you can see it's definitely a lot smaller in diameter than the actual case itself on this watch at 39 millimeters. And to compensate for that, they've done this really clever thing where they've created these kind of bridges or supports around the edge of the movement to connect it to the actual watch case itself. And those bridges are actually the hour markers. There's 12 of them. They're actually the hour markers for the time, telling of the watch as well, which is really clever from Patek Philippe, combining those two things, a problem in terms of engineering and making that a solution in terms of timekeeping and actually reading as well. So yeah, really impressive. I love that. It's one of my favorite features about this watch. The movement itself is an iconic movement from Patek Philippe. Being around for 45 years is pretty impressive. And the most impressive thing really with skeletonized movements is the difficulties with engineering that type of movement is just insane. You have to strip back everything in that movement. Everything that's not necessarily has to go, because you need it to be as transparent as possible. And every single part has to be as thin or machined out as you can possibly make it, so that again, every single part is as small and unobtrusive as possible to allow the eye to basically pass straight through the movement. So it's a really difficult thing to do. On top of that, Patek Philippe has also hand engraved every single one of these movements, and it takes around 130 hours or 3 weeks to engrave each movement or each dial. So incredible piece of watch making and engineering. It's almost like art, handcrafted art here on this dial. And I think that is really what Patek has tried to do with this watch. They've tried to make the rest of the watch as simple and kind of least attention seeking as possible, compared to the movement. So everything about this watch is about that movement. Your eye is naturally drawn to just the movement. The clasp is not too interesting. The bracelet is just twinkly and just complements the fine details that we've got going on that dial. Everything is to complement that dial, basically. I absolutely love the dial as well. The skeletonized movement on this is just incredible. The detail they've done is astonishing. The hand engraving is just so special. I love the combination of finishes on this dial as well. I love the combination of metal colors, or the actual colors on the dial too. I love the Calatrava cross as well. I love our beating heart down at 6 o'clock. Everything about it is just so intricate and special and just has such soul and spirit. It is a really special dial. It almost feels like Patek Philippe has taken a movement that is genuinely made 45 years ago, or maybe even in the 1800s. In fact, it feels much older than 45 years ago. It feels like it is made 100 or 200 years ago, and kind of encased it in these special museum cases. And we have the honor of being able to buy some special museum editions. It is really special. It's almost like going back in time looking at this watch. Which moves me on to whether or not would I own this watch, and I definitely would. I don't love the bracelet on the watch, so I probably would switch it out for maybe a leather strap and see how that looks. I think it would look really lovely. I'd probably put it on a lighter color strap so it complements that lighter dial. And I think that would change the feel of the watch quite a lot. But for me, I mean, the actual dial of that watch and the skeletonized movement and the way they've done those 12-hour bridges is just so beautiful, so clever, and totally and utterly timeless. I could definitely see myself owning this watch for the rest of my life and bringing it out for some very special occasions. I feel like this watch is a type of piece where if someone saw it, it doesn't matter if they have watch knowledge or not, they would find it truly stunning to look at. Let us know in the comments what you think of this watch. Would you own this one, or maybe another one in the Patek Philippe collection, or perhaps another skeleton watch from a different brand? Let us know what other watches you'd like us to review as well. And as always, if you're interested in this watch or any other watch in the Patek Philippe collection, then don't hesitate to contact us. Our details are in the description and also at the end of the video. And this watch is also available from us now. The link will be in the description below.